Hey gamers, this is Liz Davidson from Beyond Solitaire, and just for this video on my channel, I've got a special guest, David Thompson. How you doing, David?
I'm good, as always. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So David and I are friends. We wanted to do something fun, and so what we decided to make is a top 5 potential future settings for the Valiant Defense series. So David, you have got a fourth game on the way in the Valiant Defense series right now. So do you want to talk about that really quick?
Yeah, so super quick for people who don't know Valiant Defense. It's so far they're all been set in World War II. You take control of a small group of defenders, and you're holding out against overwhelming odds, right? So, like you said, the Volume 4 is Lanzerath Ridge. It's first day of the Battle of the Bulge. You are leading a platoon of about 20 guys, and you're holding out against 20 American guys, and you're holding out against about 500, German paratroopers, and you're able to hold them off for about a day or so if you're successful. So it just really sets back the German assault and paves the way for ultimately the Allies to come back victorious in Battle of the Bulge.
Excellent. And of course, other games in this series include Pavlov's House, which I'm on record as loving tremendously, um, Castle Itter, and Soldiers and Postmen's Uniforms. But tonight, Dave is going to give serious suggestions about what he actually might make a Valiant Defense game about, and I'm going to make stupid suggestions from my own fantasy world about what you can make a Valiant Defense game about, and we're just going to see how it goes. So, David, why don't you start? Do you have a real suggestion?
Okay, so I'm going to start us off as is not actually one of my choices. So before we start down this list of potential future things, one big caveat: the next game in the series is already planned. I won't talk about it. I'm not going to reveal it because I want Lanzerath Ridge to have its moment to shine. But I did want to mention that it's the first game in the series that I'm not the lead designer on. So somebody came and proposed it. I was a little bit. I was like, oh, maybe let's see how it looks. And the designer has done an amazing job with it. I'm super excited, and that will be our volume for next year. So we won't talk about that one, obviously, but I just want to let people know that that's there's a fifth game that's already planned. So okay,
You heard it
so
here first,
I'm
everyone.
doing. That is true. That's the first one I've ever told anybody that. So I'm doing my games in chronological order, starting with the oldest. I'll move to the newest, right? Because I didn't have any other order that I could think of. So the first one is and I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, the Sihang Warehouse. So this was 1937. This is during I think it's the second Sino-Japanese War, where the Japanese are attacking Shanghai, and the Chinese need to hold out long enough in Shanghai to allow their troops to withdraw from the area. And so you have these Chinese troops that are manning this warehouse, and they hold out for, I think it's like 4 or 5 days. They call them the something, I forget the term, the something 800, but there weren't actually 800 soldiers, there were 450. They hold out for a few days, and what's really interesting, it's very crafty of the Chinese. The warehouse is right by this sort of uh, area of Shanghai that was occupied by Westerners, right? Americans, Europeans, etc. And they did that because they knew that the Japanese would be limited in the way in which they could attack it, right? They would be scared of collateral damage. And they knew that the Western world would see this attack by the Japanese against the Chinese, and the Chinese were looking for sort of Western sympathy. So, um, very interesting story. So there's a lot going on there. I will say, and this might be a little bit of a recurring theme for people that know my series really well, it's all like at the individual guy level. That's all the counters. So when we talk about 450 counter, or guys that you'd be managing, obviously that would be a very different shift in the focus of the game at this scale.
Ooh, that's really cool. So what conflict does take place during again?
So it's 1937, right? So we think of the Second World War as like starting on September 1st, 1939, but
Yeah,
really
kind
there's so many things going on, like the Spanish Civil War, the Sino-Japanese War. So Second Sino-Japanese War. So it's just one of the many things sort of leading up to the Second World War. It's during that time period.
All right, so basically, you like to make World War II games, but you're starting to branch this to be sort of pre World War
Yeah,
II
in this case,
thing.
just slightly pre-World War II. Yep.
Ooh, I like it. I also love you could have some sort of like opinion meter or something.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you
Hmm.
could imagine. based on what the Japanese do, it's possible that they accidentally hit, one of the close by Western places, and Western support goes through the roof, etc. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting things there. Actually, the I don't have the details exactly right, and I'll apologize. Like I haven't made these games yet, so my research is pretty thin on these, right? So I'll probably get some of the details wrong, but I believe it was actually some of the Westerners who convinced the Chinese to surrender because they were scared that the Japanese would hit their people. And so it's not that the Japanese overcame the Chinese soldiers. The Chinese soldiers eventually they were successful in providing time for their fellow soldiers to withdraw, and they felt like they had gotten the sort of Western exposure they wanted, and so they were willing to withdraw those troops eventually.
Oh, that's so interesting. So for the record, by the way, so David, how long would you say it takes you to research a game? Like, I mean, this is a years long process, correct?
Yeah, I would say that on average, for a game like a historical war game that I'm working on, like Valiant Defense or by Stealth and Sea, something like that, it's about a year. So somewhere between the 6 month and a year mark is when I transition from doing just research to actually like modeling the research into the game. But I would say on average between 6 months and a year of just research before game design begins.
Awesome. So yeah, this conversation taking place before all of that. Mine's taking place without research. Forget that. No way. So my first suggestion is not at the individual level, but you could put good individuals in it because I think that this would be a great model for a Helm's Deep Lord of the Rings game. I would really enjoy trying to hold Helm's Deep until Gandalf shows up. And you can have all sorts of interesting weaponry. It's much more medieval, right? So you can have, um, fire and catapults and battering rams and, orcs and people on the wall and people inside trying to hold the door. And I feel like there would be a lot of enjoyment in that game, partially because the Valiant Defense series could, I think, be adapted for that, but also because, the Lord of the Rings. I'm sure the licensing is just so cheap; it'd be super easy. But
One thing's for sure, it would definitely have more sales. That's, I mean, what do you have? Sino-Japanese War or Helm's Deep? I mean, these are like equally popular subject matters. So,
I mean, obviously, to me, they are.
what's funny about that is when you're doing like a historical game, like you can't just make stuff up, right? Like everything has to be based in reality to some extent. Sometimes you can embellish things if you're trying to make a point, like a historical point. And it would be interesting to adapt literature like that and think through like what things have to be represented to stay true
Hmm.
to the Lord of the Rings, and what things could you embellish, right? So that would be an interesting just a thought experiment for that design.
Yeah, and Tolkien had such a complex world. I mean, you'd actually really have to read. Okay, so you would probably be able to find out things about weaponry, and it's been a while since I really gave The Lord of the Rings a good read, but I know that that's a good battle scene. You'd really have to dig in. It wouldn't take 6 months to a year, probably, but you could do some really good groundwork on something like that, I think.
Well, it's funny because you have those world war. We always joke, and we're part of the war gamer, historical gamer world. So we're talking about ourselves when I say this, but you know, you have a game, and somebody will be like, "Oh, actually, that's not the right helmet," or whatever. In our World War II games, I'm sure there are Lord of the Rings scholars that are the exact same way. Like, "Oh, actually, the orcs weren't wearing, those that type of armor in this scene, so you can't do that."
How dare you? How dare you mess up my fantasy armor? So, what would your number 4 be?
Okay, so my number four, moving along in our timeline, is the Battle of Benskar. So again, almost certainly mispronouncing that. This is 1941, I believe. It's during the Continuation War. So it's the Finns battling the Soviets. It's during World War II, but it's like again the Finnish and the Soviets fighting still. Um, there was this little island where this is like kind of where the Baltic Sea, the kind of like Baltic Sea just below Finland. And it was this little island where the Finns had a lighthouse. And they have a very small garrison on the island, like 40-ish guys. And the Soviets were scared about the Finns using the lighthouse and being sort of problematic for some of the things they were trying to do. And so the Soviets attacked the island. They assaulted it, did like an amphibious assault with a bunch of patrol craft. and they had, it depends on who you believe. You know, the Soviets say, oh, it was only like 30 guys, and the Finns say it's like 100 guys. Who knows? But the Soviets attack it, and the Finns are able to defend it. But there's some interesting things that are happening, like the Finns are supported by a couple of gunboats. So it's like, obviously, I haven't worried about thinking about this yet, but like, how do you incorporate some of this like small craft side action that's going on at the same time as the defense of the island? But yeah, I think that would be cool. And it's also, I have one of my best friends, both in terms of just in life, but also in gaming, is a guy here in Dayton that I met shortly after I moved, and so he's my main wargaming buddy, and he's huge into Finnish history, and so he actually brought this one to my attention, and so just because we're friends, this is another like, oh, this would be cool to design for him, you know.
Oh, that does sound cool. Also, I'm imagining because the water element, some sort of Valiant Defense by Stealth and Sea mashup.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I could definitely see, having some coastal defense options as the Finns trying to stop the Soviets. And I mean, what's interesting about that one that's not true for pretty much any of the other ones that we'll talk about or any of the games so far is that, at the most, the Soviets had about 100 guys, right? And so it's the one that would be most closely matched in terms of like number of forces. And so, you could almost imagine that this is a slight like expansion in terms of the attacking side. Maybe there's a more conventional two-player element to it where you could have a full up exploration of the attacking side in addition to the defending.
Definitely. I can see that being really, really cool. It is way cooler than my next suggestion, which is so let's hear me out. So I think that it'd be really fun to do a Dawn of the Dead inspired zombie mall defense game. So I was actually thinking about it while I was playing Lazarinth, because you have the fences where the soldiers can pile up at the fence, and I
Hmm.
was thinking, look at all the glass doors and stuff at a mall, so you could have like some pile ups happen, and then they would bust through the glass, and you could maybe come up with something that's either sort of creative ways to block things using stuff from the stores in the mall, or like unusual weapons that come from the available merchandise. And you
Yeah.
could definitely have like a roof sniper.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so funny, like, besides all, riffing on the exact same ideas, like all the cool zombie stuff you can pull from, like, just malls themselves are dead now. Like,
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, so, well, like, it's funny just to think of all the different settings, the realistic settings now you could do with these old dilapidated malls and stuff like that. But yeah, absolutely. It would be, you could definitely have some fun riffing on like the possibilities of holding off swarms of zombies.
oh yes, and someday, probably not too long from now, people are going to talk about malls as far in the past as we talk about World War II.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Remember when they had malls? My dad worked at a mall.
My grandpa said he went to one once.
Oh, that's awesome. They'll use, so like, when I'm researching, right, like the greatest artifacts I can find is like a map, right, from a battle. People
Yeah.
will have those stupid maps that were in the mall, right? Like those triangular things.
Yes. Oh wait, let's put eclairs in there, and then they can use the jewelry to fight off the zombies.
Oh, that's awesome.
I mean, I would be all for that. You know what I mean? Like, you can have people fighting, get their little soldiers, their people into like the sporting goods store, or at least there's something in there that you can hit a zombie with. I just feel like there's so much potential in that to be funny and to like give it a cool aesthetic from
Yeah,
the
yeah,
high point of Mall's era.
right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm
Maybe like a
all in.
Stranger Things vibe.
That's exactly what I was thinking. It would have to be the Stranger Things mall from, yeah. Yep, absolutely.
Oh my goodness, that'd be awesome. But back to serious history. What's your number three?
All right, my number 3, you know this one already. So this is Mortain, right? So we're doing chronological. So now we are August of 44, it would be, right? So this one is one that I've actually thought about. I've actually done quite a bit of research. I had to put that on the back burner because so many other projects. Um, it's it's another one where the scale is a little bit weird, right? Because when I first started thinking about the Battle of Mortain, it's for people who aren't familiar with it. Um, it was Hitler's sort of first major counteroffensive, right? So he was trying to counterattack to get back to the coast, and there was this a small little village in France called Mortain, and so the Americans hold out there, and it's super important to me because my grandfather was part of that unit that was there. And there's this one specific hill. It's called Hill 314 because that was the elevation of the hill, where a smaller part of the overall American unit was cut off, and they were cut off by themselves for like 5 or 6 days. And during that period where they're cut off, it gets so bad, and this is always the way I tell it, so that try to help it resonate with people. It got so bad, and their wounds were so bad, and their shortage of supplies was so bad that the American artillery, they would actually take propaganda shells, so like they were empty, and they would fire them at their own guys with trying to resupply them, even trying to put like plasma in there, right? Like, so you're literally are so desperate that you're putting plasma in a shell to fire it at your own people, hoping to get medical supplies. So now it's an interesting one because it's actually a massive. We were talking over a division of American troops, so thousands and thousands and thousands of guys on the supporting side, and I think it opens up a lot of opportunities that haven't been seen in a Valiant Defense game before. But one of the hesitations I have is I'm not 100% sure that Valiant Defense is the right system for it. So I
Mm.
think I think it could work, but I think it might not be the best for it. So that's kind of where I've kind of waffled, and again, other competing projects have taken over. But there will be definitely a Mortain game from me, and it might be Valiant Defense.
Nice. Yeah, I'm a big believer that you should use the system that's the best as opposed to the system that you wanted at the first, you know?
Yeah, right, exactly. Yes, exactly.
But so for those of you who don't know a ton about the Battlemore team but want to, actually, I think it was my second ever podcast interview was with you about this battle and the research you were doing. So I will link it below. Yeah, David's a podcast regular as well. All right, so I actually do have a historical one for my number 3, and it's actually one that's been modeled in a Dan Verson game before in Field Commander Alexander, because it is the Siege of Tyre. So this is a really interesting. It's a longer term battle than anything that you're normally getting from a Valiant Defense game, but basically Alexander wanted the Tyrians to accept him as the boss, of their city, and they were like, no, and they were on an island, and their walls like went right up to the sea. So Alexander couldn't just march in there and take the city, even though he had a superior army. So he spent like 7 months blockading the city and then building like a pathway from the land to finally attack. And so, you have the Tyrians who are like, stopping the Macedonians at every turn and trying to disrupt everything. But through sheer just stubbornness, Alexander does, in fact, eventually make it all the way to Tyre and take over the city. But talk about a valiant defense. I think that is such a wild battle and a wild siege. And I feel like that would be a really interesting game in itself, outside of the Field Commander Alexander system.
How long was the siege?
Months, like 7 months long.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You
Like
should
he did not play.
you should make a Valiant Defense game about that. I know a guy that could help.
That would be fun. But wait till you hear my next one. But wait,
Ooh,
there's more.
okay. All right.
But what is your number 2?
Okay, my number 2 is the Siege of Jodetville, right? So, there has been a movie about it. It's come to light in recent years. So, the movie's actually pretty good, and I think the movie is called Siege of Jodetville. It's about so time frame 1960, 1961, something like that. It's a UN force that's in this case consists all of an Irish company of infantry, I think. They are going into a separatist region of the Congo. I think it's called Katanga is the actual separatist region. They go in there and they're trying to be part of this larger UN presence, right? That's dealing with this sort of emergent Katanga separatist formation, fighting the Congolese, and they're drawn into this battle. They're actually attacked by mercenaries. the craziest like combination of people. So it's the whatever you would call them, like fighters from the separatist area, right? But they're led by these mercenaries that include like Belgians, French, Rhodesians. So like the really, really bad guys from this area, right? And so um, the Irish company holds out for, I think, again, 5 or 6 days, something like that. It's about 150 guys, and they're holding out against thousands, probably about 5,000 total that are attacking. And the attackers have things like a field gun, they have mortars, they have an aircraft that flies over and bombs them. Um, and meanwhile, the Irish are basically not defeated by the attackers, right? They're defeated through, imagine this, like political ineptitude of the UN, right? Like I know no one's surprised by that, but eventually they just there was attempts to relieve them by another UN force, but that was unsuccessful. And so eventually they just have to surrender because they have no other choice, right? They're not getting any sort of direction, mostly because of political reasons, and so ultimately they have to surrender. But I think that obviously this idea, there's a ton of political baggage with this concept, right? And
Yeah.
so you start digging into it and you're like, well, should the UN bid benefit, blah blah blah, right? You can debate all of this stuff, but what I don't think is debatable was the bravery of the actual individual guys who are Irish soldiers who are there trying to do the best job they can for what most people would think is a good, good thing. So, yeah, it's just an interesting dynamic that I think would make for a good game. Now, it starts to encroach into this probably too current to be comfortable land, right? 1961. A lot of these guys are still alive, So, me, so we start to get into like a little bit of discomfort there. But yeah, I think that would be my next one.
Ooh, that does sound really good. I feel like there's so many interesting game elements you could bring in to that would make it extra exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the most when I think about it, and again, I haven't spent much real time thinking about it, but there are these efforts to relieve them, right? To have like a support force break through and help them. And it consists of more Irish, Indians, and I can't remember who the other, maybe Swedish. But anyway, they were trying to break through and help. And like, is that possible in the game? Like, is there something you can do to like make it like this sort of alt history thing happen? Because unlike many of the other games in the series, like there was never any chance of relief for those others. But this was realistic. It could have been. So how much agency do you give the player to control that, or do you give them any at all?
Yeah. Ooh, that's good. So I'm going the opposite direction. So you've gone like further up in time.
Hmm.
This I'm gonna go back. Back.
Okay.
No, so this is after Alexander. The Alexander is the earlier of the two. But I think you could make a great Valiant Defense game out of the siege and then battle of Alesia, which is a major battle during the Gallic Wars fought by Julius Caesar. But I think it'd be really cool to do it from the perspective of the Gauls. So Vercingetorix is the leader here, and he kind of gathers, I think it's the Averni, in this last big attack on the Romans. And he's trying to lure the Romans to Alesia to do like a pincer movement on them and win. And Vercingetorix is pretty smart. But I don't think that he expected how crazy Roman siege practices are. Because the Romans essentially parked outside of the city walls and then built their own walls around the city. So they had like these double fortifications. So there's one to kind of protect them from the defenders in Lycia, and then there's a double wall to protect them from people trying to come out from outside to relieve them.
Wow. Okay.
So like it just gets totally nuts. And the Gauls are trying to slow down the construction, and then you have Gauls on the outside who, at least some, right, are showing up to try to help. But it ends disastrously. It gets so bad inside of Lycia that they sent the women and children out of the city, hoping that the Romans might show at least some mercy to them, but the Romans just let them die.
Oh my goodness. Wow.
It's
Okay.
a really brutal battle.
Yeah.
And, just a brutal siege where it just doesn't really, it's just really a cruel but very interesting defense situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I feel like that would be a very interesting setup for a game. I would
Yeah.
have to research a bit more to decide like if I thought that there was enough fighting to balance out the suffering.
Right. Right. But yeah, I mean, with the way you're describing it, I think it would be a very like it absolutely could be. It would be a very different one, right? Like you wouldn't have these waves like the traditional sort of Valiant Defense waves. Like it would have to be almost like maybe a little more localized pockets
Yeah.
potentially of activity. Yeah, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, but like I just think it's hilarious that the Romans decided like, okay, well, we'll just build our own little like walls and hang out, and then it's hard for them to mess with them
Wow.
on either side. Like,
Yeah, that's
well,
wild.
the Roman army is really cool in the sense that they were engineered. There were a lot of engineers with the army, and the armies did public works projects when they weren't fighting. So those roads, um, other large construction, is partially done because of the Roman army. So, and those guys knew how to pitch a camp really fast. They carried equipment with them. It's a totally different, attitude. But I think it'd be interesting to try to do this from the perspective of the Gallic. I mean, the Gallic forces trying to break out from inside and break in from outside.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, that's certainly different. That's cool.
Yeah, but let's not delay. What's your number
All right, my
one?
number one. Now, keep in mind we're moving to more recent, right? So, this has been one that's been requested quite a bit by people who are fans of the Valiant Defense series. So, this is either Outpost Kading or the Battle of Camdish, whichever you know that as, right? So, this is 2009, I think it is, Afghanistan. Um, it's a outpost that's almost entirely Americans. There are some local Afghans that are support there, and I think two Latvians that were with them as part of, I'm sure, like part of an element of a NATO force or whatever. And so they are attacked by insurgents. So it winds up being like about 150, or about, I guess, about 100 or 70, whatever it is, Americans, and about 300 insurgents. And this is obviously very modern. I don't feel comfortable at all. I mean, like so many things would have to happen to make this. Like I would have to reach out to all the people that were there. I'd have to work with the army. I mean, there would be so much. Like there's so many barriers to this that I will admit that this is a perfect scenario for the system, but that it's just a lot of sort of pain in this design, right? But yeah, ultimately, many Americans are wounded, some killed. Um, they do wound up evacuating the outpost, and eventually they just wind up destroying it because they had to leave ammunition and stuff behind. But yeah, of all the sort of modern battles, this is the one that's probably objectively a perfect fit for the Valiant Defense series.
Oh man, that's really cool. Have you thought about at least beginning the process of putting out feelers for this, or is it just not even something you're willing to touch right now?
I think um, I haven't. Oh, so the answer is I have not, and I think the reason is because, like I said, there would be so many things boxes that I have to check to become comfortable with it. That I know that would be a huge time investment, and I don't have the time to do it. Right. So, like the only way that something like this would be feasible is if I was doing like a military history academic study, right, where I could like literally take
Yeah.
a year and say, I need to study the Battle of Camdish for these reasons, and as part of this, I'm going to have all this historic research, and I'm going to have made these meet the people and work with the army and make sure that I'm doing everything 100% with the right level of sensitivity that this would deserve.
Yeah, and as much as I want you to just make whatever your heart desires as a designer because I like your games, I do really respect that. I think thinking about who you impact when you make a game and whether you feel comfortable about it, those are things that it's that answer is different for every person, but I like that you know where that line is for you.
Sure.
So, a serious topic. My number one is not serious. It's totally frivolous, but I think it would be such a good like I need somebody in the solo P&P group or something to make this for me. And you know what it is? It's the season. I think that Home Alone would be an amazing Valiant Defense game. It would have to be different in scale, right?
Yep.
But defending a house from some robbers and like having your little outer defenses like the doorknob that burns Harry's hand and like the Christmas ornaments right inside the window. You'd have to do something where you set up these booby traps at the house. Maybe the game would actually start with that,
Yeah.
like you choose where to place your traps
Yeah.
And and then you roll for how successful they are, and try. You have limited time and actions and stuff to get to where you can call the cops and get out of the house.
Yeah, I
Like,
think So what's funny is, yeah, I suspected this was going to be on your list, and independent of that, my wife and I watched that movie today, so the timing's perfect. Um, it's so funny. It's such a funny movie, and like humans are so weird. As a kid, I hated that movie. Right, growing up, I was like, "This movie's stupid," and now I'm like, "This movie's awesome. I love this movie. This is great." Um, did you know that there? I guess there is a Home Alone game that just recently came out, like a board game. I'm sure it's not great, but
yeah, I'm sure it's as great as the remake.
yeah, yeah.
That's all I'll
Well,
say.
yeah.
But for me, Home Alone, I loved it as a kid. Actually, I have a tremendous emotional attachment to it because it was the first movie where I saw the trailer for a movie and became excited and had the anticipation of eventually seeing the movie, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, for sure, for
So
sure.
I think I saw the trailer on, like, how they used to have little previews on the VCR
Yeah,
tapes,
yeah,
and it'd be like, coming up from this, this studio. I saw it, I imprinted on it, and I waited for that
yeah,
movie. And when
yeah.
it came out, I was so happy. And I had a talk boy.
That's awesome.
I
Yeah,
was I was very into it.
it is a really, it's just such a good movie. Now, the newest thing about Home Alone is all the people that are seeing it for like the first time now, for whatever reason, or maybe they haven't watched it a bunch of time and they put it on and they're just kind of watching it, and they realize that Maura Rose is the mom from Home Alone. They're like, wait a second. Oh,
I knew her before then.
I knew her before she was cool.
She was always cool. That's the secret.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
I don't know. I feel like that there's just so much mechanically that you could play with something like that. And I think about a more harmless equivalent, right, of something like the grenades,
yeah,
from something like Lanzerath Ridge,
yep.
where maybe you can't stop the onslaught, but you can make them give up for a little bit and then regroup. Make them give up for a little bit and regroup.
Buy yourself some time. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's cool. I'm all in. Let's do it. Valiant Defense, Home Alone.
Yes. Next Christmas. No, I'm kidding. I don't even know how much the licensing for that would even cost. Ridiculous.
Yeah, yeah. And what's awesome is if the game is super successful, we can make some really bad sequels.
Yes, we would
So
have to, and then we'd eventually have to replace the main character. And then our fourth game could be like the first game, but just different art.
yeah, yeah, that's fine. That's
But yes. So thanks so much for coming on and like talking to me about these like my
absolutely.
ideas are ridiculous, but yours are cool.
Yours definitely would sell way better. That's for sure. That's for sure.
But you have to do what you love.
No, this is cool. I always love chatting with you, and this is great. So yeah, just the season. Talk about Home Alone Valiant Defense.
Exactly. So for those of you who are out there, if you want a real Valiant Defense game that actually exists, there's one on Kickstarter right now, and that's Lanzerath Ridge. Or you can get the previous ones that have actually come out in the series, as opposed to the ones that we just made up for this video. So I know you can't tell us about the next one, but there are upcoming games in the series. How often are we planning to release Valiant Defense games in the future?
I think realistically, probably one a year. I mean, that's what it's wound up being. Like we didn't plan that specifically, but that's been about the average, and I think that makes sense.
Awesome. So y'all heard it here. Even if they're not the ones on this list, there's always more Valiant Defense on the way. So thank you so much for coming on, David.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been awesome.
Leave us some likes, leave us some comments. We want to know about what you think would be a good Valiant Defense game. And most of all, happy gaming.